Welcome all you Halloween babies out there. I am your host, Billy D, a certified Halloween baby, born on October 31st, 1976. As my mom used to say, just in time for Sunday school. Well, I hated Sunday school, but what I don't hate is movies. In fact, I love movies, especially horror, thrillers, and sci-fi. Throw in a little crime, drama, mystery, and fantasy for good measure, and that is my jam. Here at Halloween Babies Podcast, I'm aiming to produce a solo, short-form podcast focusing on films I've watched, books I've read, and shows that I've enjoyed. Some of my top films that I hold dear to me are Night of the Living Dead, Alien, The Thing, Hellraiser, and Nightbreed. Some recents that I've seen that really have stuck with me are You Won't Be Alone, Hellbender, Titane, The Night House, and The Witch. Some of my favorite shows, The Walking Dead, particularly before they took out Rick. Those first, 1 through 7 or 8 seasons I thought were great. Kind of dropped off from me a little bit, but I finished it off and I was pretty impressed with it for the most part. Another zombie show, and I love zombies. Black Summer did a great job. 2 seasons on Netflix. Highly recommend that. Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House in Midnight Mass. Good stuff. The Dark, that 3-season slice of perfection on Netflix. It blew my mind. Highly recommended. Some of my favorite novels. The Stand by Stephen King. Of course, we all grew up reading some Stephen King. I loved King, but for me, Clive Barker is the man. Read most of his works, The Great and Secret Show, deep cut, good book, highly recommend. Robert R. McCammon's The Swan Song. Similar to The Stand, it's a nuclear, post-apocalyptic, epic tale. And I actually cried at the end of that one. George R. Stewart's Earth Abides. Highly recommend. Written, I believe, in the late 40s. A pandemic wipes out just about everyone, and your main character tells a story of how he tries to recreate society. So since we're now in October, approaching the end of the year, I'm sure everyone's getting their lists together. And I thought I would run through a handful of movies that were released this year that I really enjoyed. All of these are rated at least an 8 out of 10 for me. So the first one, I actually have to give a little shout out to Brett Arnold over at the New Flesh podcast, because he recommended this one to me, and I luckily got to see it in the theater. I believe it was only in for a few days. It's called Hunt Her, Kill Her, and it also goes by Night Shift. It's written by Greg Swinson, directed by Greg Swinson and Ryan Thiessen, categorized as horror thriller, starring Natalie Terrazino. This entry into extremely low-budget horror thrillers doesn't rely on experimental jump scare trickery or over-the-top gore. Instead, it's just good old-fashioned filmmaking. It's one location, a quick, simple setup, and then cat and mouse action for a total of 89 minutes. Of course, you're going to get some low-budget dialogue and the acting that comes with it, but this is a tense, brutal, and bloody ride. Natalie Terrazino does an excellent job bringing the physicality needed to the role and pulls off the believability of her actions. Greg Swinson and Ryan Thiessen did a great job co-directing, from the opening shot that sets up our environment to the final shot that was somehow timed perfectly with the lights coming on in my theater. Next up is The Harbinger, written and directed by Andy Mitten, classified as horror, starring Emily Davis and Gabby Beans. And Emily Davis gives an excellent unhinged performance as a lonely girl in New York City at the beginning of COVID who asks her old college roommate, played by Gabby Beans, to come visit because she's having a few issues she needs help with. Once the setup is complete, you are taken down a rabbit hole of lucid dreaming, false realities, infectious ideas, and a haunting figure, all packed into a tight and foreboding 87-minute film that questions our existence, our memories, and how we process information. Next up is Wicked Games, written and directed by Teddy Greenan. It's classified as a thriller. It's got a very home invasion feel. Starring Kristen Sprang and Marcus Silbiger. This was a fun ride. It's low budget and the story is derivative of many, many things, but stick with it because it gets wild and brutal. I found the cinematography to be fresh and kinetic. The music and stinger drops were on point, and the writing and acting was strong. Next up is a Tubi pick, and shout out to Bill Van Bagel. This one's called Baby Blue, written and directed by Simon Boyes and Adam Mason, directed by Adam Mason, classified as horror, starring Ali Lonides, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Aramis Knight. And this is just a surprising little gem that has a bit of everything: found footage, a cursed video, serial killer, possession, podcasters, and just a touch of comedy. Fans of Into the Badlands will enjoy seeing Tilda and MK as well. I thought the acting, directing, and tone overall execution was solid and had a great time with this one. Next up, The Lesson, written by Alex McKeith, directed by Alice Troughton, classified as a thriller, starring Richard E. Grant, Julie Delpy, and Daryl McCormick. Low boil tension and subterfuge abound. I was fully engaged by the atmosphere and performances. I found that a movie about the artistry of written word, a lot of the plot is conveyed with slight, subtle looks and gestures. I can see a lot of viewers taking issue with the ending of the third act, but I was fully on board. Next up is Birth, Rebirth, and this film poses the question: what if David Cronenberg made The Odd Couple? Laura Moss, with their first feature film debut, answers that question in a fresh, disturbing, and at times dryly comical take on the Frankenstein tale, and weaves in commentary on motherhood, morality, and sacrifice. After we are introduced to our two future roommates, Celia, played by Judy Rice from Scrubs, and Marin Ireland, who gives one hell of a performance and at times dominates the screen. The direction follows the old show don't tell ethos in its storytelling through the use of well-crafted tone, atmosphere, dialogue, and a wonderful score with a healthy heap of viscera throughout. No jump scares or cheap tricks here, just a slow build of tension and unease with a few laughs sprinkled in for good measure. Next is Sanctuary, written by Micah Bloomberg, directed by Zachary Wiggin, classified as a drama thriller, starring Christopher Abbott and Margaret Qualley. And Margaret Qualley absolutely kills it, along with Christopher Abbott in this single location drama thriller that also has elements of comedy and romance. Through twists and turns, we learn the nature of their relationship and how two very different people can feel right at home with each other. Last on the list is The Passenger, written by Jack Stanley, directed by Carter Smith, classified as a thriller, starring Johnny Berchtold and Kyle Gallner. Carter Smith has delivered a tense, brutal, and powerfully effective thriller about how trauma can lead to paralyzing regret. Johnny Berchtold plays Randolph Bradley, a timid young man who just wants to do his job and keep his head down. But unfortunately, his coworker Benson, played by Kyle Gallner, has other plans. Both leads give excellent performances. Berchtold appears broken and fragile, and Gallner is fierce, charming, and unhinged. All the secondary players give strong and endearing performances, thanks in part to a strong script, a believable small-town atmosphere, and a great direction. One of the best films of the year, in my opinion. So, with Halloween Babies podcast, this is my first introduction episode. Subsequent episodes, I'm going to try and follow a format where I talk about my recent watches, what I've been reading, and then pick a film to do a little deep dive into. And these will be films that I don't feel got as much love as they deserved, or, were misunderstood. So for the second episode, I'm aiming to do a little deep dive into The Empty Man. This was a film that came out at the height of the pandemic, and due to some studio issues, it got almost no representation, no promotion. It was just kind of dumped out into the world. I don't even think there's a physical media copy of it available. I had to purchase it digitally. So that's going to be episode 2. And before I close this episode out, I would just like to give a shout out to some podcasts that got me into this. I've been listening to some of these for 4 years or so. Some of them are a little bit newer than that. The first 2 podcasts that I came across were the New Flesh podcast and Exploding Heads Horror Movie podcast. I grew to love those. They've lost some hosts. It's hurt me a little bit, but they keep trucking on. Next would be Jay of the Dead. I can't really name any one of his. They're all so influential. Horror movie podcast, horror movie weekly. You name it, he's got his hand in it. Land of the Creeps, everyone of all the creepers over there, love them. Phantom Galaxy, the Watsy Party, love it. A new one, No Bodies, love it. So check all those out, and big thanks to everyone involved in those. And with that, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can reach me at halloweenbabiespodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram at halloweenbabiespodcast, or go on over to YouTube, and Halloween Babies Podcast has some videos that I've made, little horror themed shorts that I've put some music to, and check those out. So in closing, have a happy October, everyone, and keep on keeping on.